as one of Temple's most ardent Temple football supporters, has left us at the age of 91, and that's Dr. Peter Chertoff, who unfortunately passed away. And now joining us to remember the great life of Dr. Peter Chertoff is a good friend of the program and Dr. Peter Chertoff as well, and that is the play-by-play voice of the Temple Owls in Harry Donahue. Harry, thanks for joining us, and how are you?
I'm doing great, Zach. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you for coming on, and we do send our condolences to you because we know that Dr. Peter Chertoff was a good friend to you, but just give our audience a little bit more perspective of what Doc meant to you.
Well, Zach, as you know, I don't think there was a greater supporter and a more loyal follower of Temple University and especially Temple Athletics than Doc. I first met him probably almost 25 years ago when I came back to do Temple football. And Doc at the time was maybe the single most biggest donor to Temple football. And as a result of that status, was able to travel to all the games on the charter flights. And I'll tell you what, those were the days of wins being few and far between, Zach. But just having Doc along for the ride and enjoying as much as we could the games, and then listening to his commentary often during the game made it worth the trip, even if we were getting our ears blown off by the likes of Miami and Virginia Tech. He was a passionate follower of Temple football and basketball, but more football, I think. And even though those years were hardly winning years like they are now, Doc Chodoff always saw the light at the end of the tunnel and did financially whatever he could to help the program. And of course, when they opened up the Edberg Olson facility over 10th and Diamond, originally that was a grass field, and that did work out well. And they came to Doc and asked him if he would lead the campaign to put in an artificial surface. And not only did he lead it, but he gave a huge amount of money. And as a result, it is Chodoff Field and will be Chodoff Field forever. That's just the kind of guy Doc was.
And I know some confidants of him, they would ask him, and he would always joke about this, why he was always so loyal to this program. Because like you were mentioning, there was always those up and down times, and you don't see many seasons like we got to see this past year. At the end of the day, why do you think he had so much loyalty to this program?
I think he enjoyed the interaction, and he was accepted by not only players but the coaches. I mean, back in those days, we're talking like Ron Dickerson, to be followed by Bobby Wallace. And Doc was very close to both of those guys, but especially Bobby. And then Al Golden, who came in as a young guy to replace Bobby Wallace. And right away, Al accepted Doc. I mean, it's like he knew what to expect from Doc. And Doc would give him sometimes a tough time. You know, Doc's thing was always special teams, believe it or not. I mean, he could live with, maybe a porous defense or an ineffective offense, but he couldn't stand, Zach, a bad snap by the long snapper that would maybe botch a punt or a field goal or an extra point. And back in those days, I remember one game, we were playing at the Vet against Syracuse. I think it was at the Vet. I don't think we had moved yet because we were in the MAC when we moved to the Link. And we scored the touchdown with an extra point. It would have gone overtime. And the kicker missed it. It hit the upright. And instead of a 14-14 game going to overtime, Syracuse won. It was the last play of the game. Everybody anticipated overtime. But they screwed up the extra point, and that meant they screwed up the chance to win it in overtime. And Doc went ballistic. Well, who didn't? But these are the kind of things we just try. But you know what? By the next Saturday, he was all fired up and ready to go. I mean, he would, sulk for maybe 24 hours. And then by Tuesday, you were there through your career at Temple as a student, and a fine job you do of covering football and basketball and all the athletic programs. You know how the news conferences are. And you know who would be sitting in the front row, whether it's Al Golden, Bobby Wallace, Ron Dickerson, or Matt Rule or Steve Adazio. You know who is sitting right there looking at them, Doc Chodoff.
So Doc had to be a little bit extra amped up this year when Temple was able to block that PAT up against UMass, Harry, is what you're telling me.
doesn't really describe it, I don't think, but he was really amped up over that whole wave of enthusiasm that was captured by everybody, I think, for the game day experience against Notre Dame. Undefeated midway through the season. A chance. They beat Penn State. I mean, you kidding? Doc remembers the last time they beat Penn State. Okay, he was a youngster. He wasn't a Temple student, but he remembers 1941. So to see them win convincingly over Penn State and then go up against Notre Dame as an undefeated team and take that game into the final, literally seconds, and win the division championship and play in the American championship game against Houston, and for him to be there in person and go to a bowl game. I mean, it's almost like he made a pact with the man upstairs, Zach, and said, look, you give me this, and this, and I'll be ready to go. And that's how it played out.
We're talking to the play-by-play voice of the Temple Owls and Harry Donahue. And Harry, as you've mentioned, the charismatic Dr. Chodoff, he meant so much not only to Temple athletics, but Temple University as an institution. You, I imagine, have a lot of fond memories. So what are some of your most fond memories as a media member with him?
Well, as I said, he was able to travel with us on the charters. And Doc, most of the players knew who he was. If they didn't by the time they were sophomores, they did by the time they were seniors. They'd always say, hey, Doc, how you doing? The coaches kind of like, they used to like enjoy going back and forth with Doc. And maybe once in a while, you know, if Temple did make a good play because they knew Doc was always there when Temple didn't. They'd say, hey, Doc, how'd you like that touchdown PJ threw? Or, hey, Doc, what about, the 5 field goals that Brandy McManus made because special teams was always his thing. Doc always had that. He wasn't, let's put it this way, he didn't hold back on making known his opinion, whether he was talking to me or whether he was talking to Mike Kern of the Daily News or whether he was talking to Al Golden or Matt Rule. I mean, and you know what? They listened to him because they knew how critical he was to being one of the main reasons Temple still had football. And you could put up with some of Doc's antics once in a while. We had him in the booth. He used to come up on road games, and he would ask if he could sit in the booth. And, I started doing games with Reggie Wilkes. Then it was Steve Joachim. Of course, now it's Paul Palmer. So Doc would come in and say, Doc, here's the rules, okay? You can sit here, but, no cheering, none of that stuff. Just, it's like, we can see it, but we can't hear you. Fine, okay. Well, sure enough, in the heat of battle, there'd be a play, and especially if it didn't go Temple's way, there'd be a pounding on the desk of the console there right next to me, and maybe an expletive here or there, and I'd look at him, and I'd say, when I had time, I'd say, Doc, what are you doing? That went out over the air, whether it did or not. And he'd say, I'm sorry, I can't take it anymore. And he'd walk out of the booth, and then he'd come back in 10 minutes, and he'd stand, or he'd come and sit down, and I said, now remember the ground rules, Doc. And he'd say, okay, I will. But, it was almost expected that Doc would lose it at one point or another, either for a big play or for a bad play. And in those years, of course, most of the years that he followed it was bad plays. And when he lost it, he lost it. But then, it'd be the next week, and it'd be, like I say, all amped up, ready to go for the next game. And we used to go, part of our routine, we'd check into a hotel on a Friday. We'd always meet at happy hour downstairs for a little libation. And I actually introduced Doc to Belvedere martinis. Well, he couldn't have a Friday happy hour without at least one Belvedere martini. And I'll take credit for that. And some of the best conversations I ever had with the good doctor were over a nice, chilled Belvedere martini. Every time I have one, I'm going to think of Doc.
Well, that's definitely a good way to remember him. And as you had mentioned earlier in this interview, another way that people will be able to remember him is the fact that Chodoff Field is where Temple football practices, as that is at Edberg Olson Hall. You mentioned earlier that it was a grass facility and then they wanted to change it to turf. Why was he so instrumental in getting that done?
Well, because he had the financial wherewithal to do it, and he had been a big booster financially to Temple sports. And at the time, Bill Bradshaw was the athletic director, and their development arm came to Doc and said, Doc, we need X amount of dollars here to get this thing off the ground. And he didn't hesitate to write a check. I mean, Temple has we all know, thousands of alumni. And it's always been, I think, a big concern of whoever the president is or the athletic director, that why more of them don't step up and support the athletic programs in particular, like some other schools do. Temple's, as many alum as they have, and this isn't necessarily a criticism, it's a reality. They just haven't stepped up and supported Temple athletics maybe the way that they should, and definitely the way other large institutions similar to Temple with alumni do. But Doc led the way. I think Doc, without doubt, was the single biggest donor to Temple football. I know he was, and he never hesitated to do it. And he's not a multi-millionaire, believe me. But Doc Chodoff did more with what he had than any individual I know. And it was all going in one direction, Temple athletics.
On the way out here with Harry Donahue, who joins us as we remember the great life of 91 years of Dr. Peter Chertoff. You were saying earlier, and we saw it on Monday when we found out the news, how many people from years past and the current players showed their support on social media. We saw tweets from guys like Paul Palmer to all the way to current players, people that just left the team, in a guy like a Kyle Friend. Why was Doc able to create so many relationships with people generation after generation? Because you usually don't see that within a program, that a man could have that much respect from so many people.
Well, I think, first of all, it begins with the fact, Zach, and you saw him. I mean, he would be at practices. He'd be there during spring practices, cherry and white day, on the sidelines, talking to players. During the season, he'd come regularly to practice, the news conferences. He'd intermingle not just with the coaches, but also the players. He was concerned about them, and it was genuine. I mean, he wasn't one of these guys just, was like a jock sniffer. That may not be the appropriate term, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, he really cared about these kids, too. He used to invite kids over and let's not forget, too, his longtime companion, Joan Salter, who also went on all the games with Doc. They would invite players, coaches over to their homes for barbecues in the summer. Joan used to, on road trips, you know how the players come out of the locker room and they'd be given a meal, a sandwich or something like that. Joan would be the person helping the managers distribute those sandwiches and Gatorades to the players as they came out of the locker room and got on the bus for the trip over to the airport and flight home. I mean, how many people do that stuff who are, quote, big-time donors? Doc and Joan did it. And I think this connected with, kids that were young enough to be their great-grandchildren, okay? So the players recognize that. I know the coaches recognize that. And as quirky as Doc could be at some times, he was the most lovable man in the world. And personally, this is a big loss for somebody like myself.
Well, Harry, we do appreciate the time today. And once again, we do send our condolences to the entire Chodoff family and, of course, your family as well, because we know how close you were with the Doc for all those years. So thanks for a few minutes. We appreciate it.
Anytime, Zach, and especially talking about the good doctor.
Thanks so much, Harry. There is Harry Donahue joining us on the hotline, WHIP Radio in Philadelphia, as we remember the life of Dr. Peter Chertoff, a man that has meant so much to this Temple football program, a ardent supporter, and someone that we're going to continue this legacy of Dr. Chertoff for many years to come. And every day when Temple players practice at Edberg Olson Hall, they will always practice on Chodoff Field. Time in the WHIP studios is 11:15. We'll take a quick break, and when we get back, Obi and Echionia will join us.